one of Homer's tales. There was the, oh God, what was his name? The one who had gotten lost by sea.
Odysseus?
Odysseus, thank you. Odysseus, and when he was lost on the island, and you had this woman who was turning every man into a pig, basically. And she was basically a witch. She was a crafter, but then she actually kind of fell in love with Odysseus and didn't want him to leave, and then turned him into an animal. But that was the other thing. In the fictional works, all these witches, they had these powers of poison and herbs, of turning men into animals, and usually trying to seduce these people, and they would kind of turn in on them. It would, at the end of the story, it would either they would fall in love with the person they were trying to snare, or they would lose the person they were trying to get a hold of, or they would suddenly have a change of heart and want to actually help now instead of causing all the trouble. But you have Hecate being brought into these stories, as usually the witches are followers of Hecate, but bringing her in a more kind of darker aspect, bringing forth the fact that she dealt with the dead and the dog, bane of the dogs, and one of the titles that was given to her was basically filth eater. It was basically this idea that she was she was the eater of the dead and decay, and almost was they were giving her this bad reputation as this very dark deity that you don't talk about. She was being lumped in, she was being right up there with Hades, who back then there were really no temples to Hades. There's only like a few, and most of them are caves where people believe was the entrance to the underworld. But you never really spoke outwardly about Hades. You never said its name or anything for fear that he might suddenly pop out of the earth and grab you and take you under. So Hecate herself was starting to be lumped into this aspect where you only talk about her and whisper because you were afraid that suddenly you would hear a dog howling and you'd be doomed or something. Does anyone have any questions so far? That was one of the things I was worried about, like, blah, here's all this information. I don't know what you're going to do with it. But this is where you start seeing the more from the virginal woman who is bringer of life to the keeper of death, where she's slowly morphing into something unpleasant, because a lot of the poetries and stories about her also talk about her in almost a Gorgon way, where as I said earlier, when the symbols for her was serpents, well, one description would talk about her as the dirt on her feet and the filth eater, and the one at the night of the crossroads where you had to watch out if you started hearing the baying dogs, because that might be her. She would also apparently would have serpents in her hair and around her belt and everything. So it's like this really freaky image of her. And it was, in some ways, they were making her more extreme frightfully, because she was also kind of this guardian too. So similar to a gargoyle, who is really scary and nasty, but he's a guardian. He's actually doing the good thing. He's guarding the gateway. This is probably where also she started morphing into the crone form, because when we think of death and the decay of the body, you think of old age and slowing down and everything, and just to most people, seeing something like that really kind of puts morality in perspective to you. So this is probably why she was slowly becoming almost the image of what we all fear will eventually happen to us. She's almost trying to reflect back, this is going to be you someday. You're going to grow old and you're going to die, and I will be there when you are. So it's one of those interesting aspects that she, even though she's considered the triple deity, you just see her in the one aspect as the crone of the triple. So today in modern witchcraft, you'll see her in crone form, but you'll also see her in her young form. Sometimes they'll have her both as maiden, mother, and crone. This is similar to how it used to be in Greek, where like I said, the triple form of the crossroads of heaven, earth, and the ocean, but also as a triple form as the mother, the warrior, and the wise woman as well. So she had all these various layers, and today you mostly just see her in the one form, in the one layer of the maiden form, the mother form, and the crone form. It's not even warrior anymore. It's more a mother, nurturer, almost her original aspect, really. Some of the offerings made to her, like I said, was the dog, but actually today offerings also are made of garlic as well, and which is actually a purifier in itself. So that is probably one of the ways, because she was also a deity of herbs, of medicine, but she was also a deity of poison as well. She was the one that people would often refer to in the poetry about being someone concocted a poison. It was either because of her knowledge or through her that they would have this poison, or when they mentioned the witches would be basically the one you go to if you want to get rid of someone or harm someone. They would know both how to help and cure someone, but also how to cause some harm or kill someone too. So, but most of the poetry students focused on more like, hey, I just need someone to go away now. How do I do that? Also, she was considered, one of her titles was Keeper of the Keys. This is not dissimilar to voodoo with Papa Legba, who also is a keeper of keys, keeper of the gateways. Basically, she is the one you have to encounter if you want to either get into the underworld at times in some stories, or even getting into Olympus with the other gods. She was the holder of the keys. She had the gate, and either she let you say yes, you may pass, or no. So people would give offerings when they were traveling. If they had to go someplace or pass into boundaries that were not their own, like into other cities, they would often make offerings to Hecate, because she was the keeper of the gateways, of the keys. So they would give her something going, okay, make sure I can get back okay. Since I'm going somewhere that's not mine, that's a foreign area, let my travels be safe. So they would give her an offering at the crossroads, basically, before they left for the next town where they were going to. And then when they were returning, they gave her another offering going, thank you for letting me survive this one. And they would give her offering for that as well. That is not unsimilar to Papa Legba as well. When in doing voodoo, he's the first you talk to before you talk to the Lao. And you promise, I will give you offerings to allow once I'm done with this. Thank you for letting me pass. So she is not dissimilar to any of the other deities of the crossroads and whatnot. Hello. Does anyone have any questions so far?
So going back to like the poisons and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
So has it been, I don't know, it may sound odd, but is Hecate for hex? Is that how we came up with that word, I wonder?
Hecate, the translation for Hecate is usually the worker of will, but also the one who can see from a distance, really. And apparently at one point in Asia Minor, there were like over 300 altars or 300 towns or things named in connection with Hecate. That's how popular she was, really. And that's probably one of the reasons why she was able to be absorbed into Greek and Roman without huge amount of change made to her, because she was so well known. Other deities, unfortunately, if they are not as well known or smaller, they will often get absorbed into another deity or entirely forgotten. Actually, one of the things also connected to her was her sister, Cadella, who is actually not very popular because of what she does. She is actually, one of her titles is basically Bringer of Madness. She, yeah, she
was in my book.
She was basically the deity who was the one that would bring madness and hysteria onto people. She was the one where during like the bacchanals, where people, I don't know if you ever heard, there would be a group of women, basically they would take a drink or take some sort of alternative drug, mind-altering drug, and basically work themselves up into such a frenzy, they would pretty much go mad. And there would be stories of them basically like running down deers and tearing them apart and eating the raw flesh. This is how crazy they would get. They'd be in such a frenzied state. So her sister was basically the deity that would be bringing on this madness. Well, she wasn't very popular, so her Hecate herself actually absorbed some of her traits. She was starting, instead of them talking about her sister, she would be spoken about when it came to people having hysterics or sudden madness, or one of the things they talk about, especially with medicine work, with love potions and spells, was this urge or when you couldn't get this, like if, especially with a love spell, if you couldn't get this person out of your mind, that they entirely absorbed everything your entire life, this almost maddening focus on one person, they talked about how she was the reason for it. She was the reason why you suddenly could not think about anyone else but this one person. So she would be connected with making a love spell so that someone else would suddenly want you and nothing else but you. And it's like, okay, Hecate, make them crazy for me. Literally. So, like I said, she absorbed some of her sister's traits, which was basically madness. Another thing that was interesting with the dog aspect of her, sometimes one of the titles was basically dog who can turn into maiden. She almost, you would see statues of her with like 2 hounds at each side, and it soon became more that she was the hounds that she would morph into, either a human or hound, depending on what the situation was. Or some described her voice sounded like a dog barking, or that if you hear one barking, that's Hecate, and you should go the other direction, basically. Also, other images will show her, like I said earlier, the triple heads on one body. One of the heads would be a head of a hound, another head would be a head of a serpent, and then a head of a head of a horse. And the horse was probably more connected with the fact that she dealt with roads and travel, and the horse was one of the main forms of transportation at the time, other than your own 2 feet, really. Now, with her in working with poisons, it's not as focused upon now. Thank goodness, not people are poisoning each other as much. But a lot of things she is connected to is the herbs, is the medicines, is the curing people. Actually, a lot of the plants that are at their prime at night is connected with her, even though she is often connected with the new moon when it's at its darkest, when basically you can't see anything because the moon is totally covered. She is at times, though, connected with the plants that you will find when the moon is at its fullest, when the light is brightest at night, that you can pluck these plants. Now, what's interesting, too, with the fact that we now connect her with the new moon, is most likely because of that triple aspect of the waning and the waxing of the moon, of when you will see images with the crests of the moon and at the waning and waxing moment, and then at the fullest of this moment. This is connected with her, but she wasn't really all that much connected with the lunar for the longest time in the Greek and Roman period. That was more Artemis and Diane who had a lunar connection. She would be mentioned with them, but it wasn't truly her until about 200 years after she was actually absorbed into their culture that you will start seeing statues of her with the crest on her forehead. And the other thing that's quite interesting is the fact that in the Greek period, no one did business in the new moon. When the moon was gone, no one would do any business or make any trades or conduct anything finance because it was considered bad luck for those 3 days, because the